Trouble brewing in paradise with DCG, Genesis, and Gemini. All of this starting to culminate into some pretty heated scenarios that are playing out right now, of course, in the open, as it is here on crypto Twitter. We're seeing more and more of this almost every day. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into Tech Path today. We're going to jump into it. This is a very interesting situation because I think it will, one, outline maybe the future of Bitcoin, the future of things like Decentraland, the future of a variety of projects and programs and companies that are owned by DCG. We'll break into all that good stuff in today's video. I do want to thank our sponsor, and that is I Trust Capital. If you guys are looking at going into long-term holding, which is what we probably should be doing right now, is looking at strategies that are thinking more long-term. And one of the ones that I use, of course, is crypto IRAs. And this is one of the best places out there. I think that is a good place to start. You can, of course, invest crypto in gold also, as well as silver. They have a ton of assets available too, so it's more than just Bitcoin and ETH. There's a lot happening over on I Trust Capital. And they're one of the more, I would say, conservative companies out there. They do a great job at doing education, and they do a fantastic job, I think, in just delivering on just a quality service. So if you want to get a $100 funding reward, just use our link below in the description, and it's going to help the channel out. All right, so let's get into it today. I want to get into the Gemini open letter. And this was, of course, put out by Cameron Winklevoss, who is one of the twins of the exchange Gemini. And remember, just so you understand who Cameron and Tyler are, these are the Facebook twins. These are the guys who essentially helped start Facebook. They ended up going into a lawsuit with Mark Zuckerberg as he tried to cut them out. Kind of ran into a problem. They then later invested in crypto and got rugged over on Mt. Gox. It was one of the reasons that they launched Gemini. So they've been in some cycles before where some bad guys have basically kind of taken advantage of them. Now, granted, they settled with the situation with Facebook, and Mt. Gox kind of resolved itself in its own way, but the real fact is that they had seen these kind of antics for quite some time, and they're not new to seeing these kind of antics. So in this article, it kind of breaks down a couple of things, and that was in the open letter, and this was according to Winklevoss, that the group, meaning DCG, made false statements about Genesis' financial wealth and solvency in order to induce lenders to provide new loans to the company. And I'll break that down a little further. The 4-page letter gives timelines, which is pretty significant, around these misrepresentations, and then started with Genesis liquidating 3AC back in June of 2022. So again, really a big push. And then also Barry, DCG and Genesis embarked on what they basically state is a crafted campaign to make Gemini Earn users and other lenders believe that DCG had injected $1.2 billion of actual support into Genesis. So when you get into the article or the open letter, there's a lot of details in there that really kind of break into it. I would recommend just go over to Cameron's Twitter page. I'm going to zoom in on this right here. This is the Earn update that they have been doing on Tuesdays and Fridays. This, of course, came out on January 10th. But right here is the letter. And you can kind of see, as he's saying, the first line he hits on defrauded by Genesis Global Capital. I mean, he's naming names, 340,000 Earn users in there. Let me kind of zoom up on that just a little bit for you guys. And then he goes into a litany of things that occurred. And he's really kind of airing the laundry of what occurred in the essence of the Genesis loan, which they lent $2.36 billion of assets to 3AC. And this, of course, started the process. And then after the collateral is liquidated, Genesis indicated it left with a loss of at least $1.2 billion. At that point, Barry from DCG had legitimate options. He could restructure Genesis, the book, and then or fill the $1.2 billion hole. He did neither. So this is the issue that's facing Genesis right now, which is basically a loan holder to, of course, Gemini, the Earn book. So that in itself is a big problem. Now, the other thing that happened in this letter was he explained the whole scenario around this promissory note, which was kind of like the asset that was used to secure the loan from Gemini. And that is a big problem because it starts to get into some really kind of questionable scenarios of accounting. And that's really kind of what Cameron is talking about, is this is more of an accounting fraud because they're doing financial gymnastics over here with 3AC and Genesis to help it make it look like there is an asset base that loan could go against. And then they're throwing in the 10-year promissory note. Now, this is not, if you guys know how promissory notes, these are typically assetless, meaning it's not something that you get a lien on something. You go take a loan with a bank. Most of the time they have a lien on your business, meaning if you default, they can go sell your business, your car, your house, those kind of things. Those have real tangible connectivity to a loan, versus a promissory note is what it is. It's a promise to pay. Most of the time, these do not come with any type of tie to an asset. So that in itself was a little bit skeptical around all this. And I had a chance to talk with some attorneys about this. And based on the front of what this letter states, at the very least, this could go into class action with the Earn users dealing with this. You've got Ryan Selkis here from Masari coming in. To be honest, collateralized crypto lending was always a bad idea, but a spot ETF is a different story. These are the legitimate products that build asset classes. And the Bitcoin is the trust, and it's just locked in getting milk in perpetuity at the expense of GBTC shareholders. This is another problem that, of course, exists out there today. And when you look at some of the things, this was a piece that Laura Shin, I won't play this, but it was a piece that Laura Shin did with Rem Alawalia, and he explains it in pretty good terms, in the sense of that Genesis really has only one option here, and that is, well, two technically. One, file bankruptcy. Two, I think that bankruptcy is not an option because I think it would reveal some shenanigans in the accounting, and that I think is the bigger problem for Barry Silbert. So the other option is just to make it whole, figure out a way, and companies do this all the time. This is something that companies would approach others. Let's do an acquisition, let's do a structured merger, an M&A of some sort. You've got enough assets in your coffers to be able to entice in the right kind of companies to possibly do this. So I think that is the scenario that plays into this. This was a Market Insider piece basically saying that DCG is reportedly now under investigation by U.S. prosecutors over the transfers at lending arm of Genesis. Now, this gets back into what Winklevoss is referencing, is these transactions that were occurring between Genesis and 3AC. And with 3AC already in hot water, it starts to open up a lot of these kinds of investigative positions. And as the story goes on, it says the SEC basically says, hey, we're looking at the financial transfers between DCG and Genesis, and the crypto lending unit, which is Crypto Global Capital, and how this all plays out. So they're probing what investors were told about these transactions. The crypto group said last week that its borrowing and lending business needs more time to sort out its rocky financial situation. Now, this could be true in the sense that they just need more time to deal with this, or it could be the continuation of problems, and this is just kicking the can down the road. So that's the bigger problem here. Peter Mack said, listen, we got 340,000 Earn customers, must take priority over one CEO. And this was in the additional call out in the letter from Cameron, which basically said, we want Barry Silbert's head, meaning to the board of DCG, you need to oust him. To oust him and put someone in that essentially would try to correct this situation, which appears that it could be corrected providing the right players came to the table. Does not mean that it just automatically would occur if Barry Silbert were to step down. It simply means that there might be an option for that to occur. Now, there's a lot happening with Barry Silbert, because remember that many people will say, well, why didn't we see an ETF? Well, some of the reasons, this was an SEC ruling. Now, just grant, I'm just going to say this source right here, I wouldn't say that it's a press source, but it's an interesting analysis. So take it for what it is. SEC ruling was a stern rebuke of Bitcoin's backroom dealing and unsavory culture. So this is something that, unfortunately, this is where Gensler has actually been right before. And I hate to say that he's right in these kind of things. But further in the article that he breaks down was basically around the timeline of what Silbert was doing in the activity of potentially manipulating the digital asset Ethereum Classic. And this was, if you just look at it, he bought for himself, then for his family. It's a whole litany of how they were basically running it, and then utilizing things like, well, we won't say it, but their media arms that could potentially just put it out there. And then consider all that in the light of what the SEC cited above, an additional fact that before any of these misbehaviors, hijinks, the SEC already found that Barry Silbert's Bitcoin investment trust broke rules that were designed to prevent manipulation of a security before then offering. So that in itself also kind of opens up a bit of a can of worms for the situation overall. This is DCG's portfolio. I'm just going to, if you, and literally you have to alphabetize it. So they've got a chart here because there's so many. These are the companies that they're involved in. And let's just go on down here. You can kind of see there's Cambridge, Carbon, Acquired, Chain Analysis, Circle, Civic, Cobalt, Cognito, Coinbase, also involved in that. CoinDesk, right there. Let's find out. So you can kind of see this was acquired by DCG in January 2016, so it's wholly owned. So these are the kind of scenarios. CoinFlex, CoinHouse. I mean, it's just a ongoing list. So there are opportunities here, I think, of making it right. The question is, why has Barry Silbert not responded to Cameron out in the open? I mean, there has been some responses, but it hasn't necessarily been on point. Now, one theory that could play into this is that BlackRock could come in and just wipe it all out and they're already adding BTC to their global allocation fund, from kind of a passive investment. Think about this. Remember, BlackRock is the largest fund manager globally, I think 17 trillion. It's estimated that only 0.32% of their investment fund is enough to buy all of Bitcoin. So you can imagine what they could do with something just even as small, even though DCG is massive, but it's something as small as DCG. This was an article also by Nat Brunel. I want to play this one though for you guys because he makes a statement here that is not exactly true, I don't think. But let me play this for you.
Now here's where it gets where shareholders actually have some kind of power here. Is in the event of a DCG bankruptcy, shareholders from the language in the charter, if they are greater than 50% of the shareholders vote, they could say, no, we don't want to liquidate the trust. We want to move the trust to a different sponsor instead. Right. And so that's what the power they have in the event of a bankruptcy. So it's very unlikely that DCG will decide to liquidate the trust because it would kill their baby, kill their Grayscale Bitcoin trust. And
all right, so let me kind of break that down because my understanding in business law, and I've been around it, and I have lots of attorneys that constantly consult me on these kind of things. But in bankruptcy law, if you enter into bankruptcy, that's a federal bankruptcy. You don't have control of those assets regardless of any charter that may be in place within your charter of your incorporation or your documents. So even as a business, they would not necessarily have any control at that point because once a bankruptcy proceedings begin, all assets are essentially frozen because they have to go in line of creditor. And at that point, that would put the trust in there as a liquidation or could be a liquidation event. So that's not something I think. Now, if he's talking about prior to bankruptcy, if that were to occur, yes, they probably could vote on it. Prior to bankruptcy, we're getting ready to go to bankruptcy court and we need to liquidate and or do a transfer. Sure, that's a possibility. But once it's in bankruptcy, at that point, it's out of the hands of anyone from the corporate entities. At that point, the government comes in and essentially somewhat the courts control those assets, just like we saw with FTX, where the U.S. Court system now has the control of Robinhood, which is almost $500 million in assets of FTX. So this was another good breakdown over on Bankless. And Jack Inabit does a good job at breaking down a lot around where this is going. There was a couple of things that he focused on, and this is kind of the interesting scenario. And this was the salvo fired into 3AC and the balance sheet force that put DCG to extend the 1.1 promissory note. Remember, this is the promissory note that went back to the Winklevoss or Gemini and a 10-year maturity to a subsidiary. This was to the subsidiary in addition to an existing intercompany loan made at arm's length, again, not security, for $575 million, and this was all due in May. Oh, and there was also that outstanding $350 million credit facility with Eldridge. So you can see there's a lot of financial gymnastics going on. If anything, this is creative accounting. And of course, Cameron Winklevoss says it's fraudulent accounting based on the kind of things that really were played out into this. And then you had this tweet. So here are two key options here. One, sell Grayscale and sell GBTC Holdings, 600 million plus 470 million. That equals the 1.7 billion. Unwind Grayscale if you can't sell it, and get the assets back to par, which is around 900 million. And let's call either option a wash at $1 billion, less than the 2.2 billion that is needed. So in other words, it's not going to happen. That would essentially kind of roll it up into the potential of a bankruptcy scenario. And these are the kind of things that you do see. It's once your balance sheet, you owe more than you can liquidate, then at that point you are insolvent, and a bankruptcy proceeding, whatever level you take, is in play. So this would be interesting because they go into this also about, could there be a bailout? Realistic, a potential buyer would need to be paid for the deal even to begin to make sense of it. In other words, someone would have to be paid to take this deal as it is right now. So you can kind of see this is the problem. You'd have to be paid by to buy DCG. You're on the hook for $2 billion in claims and other clawbacks, and you have 1.1 billion in loan collateral, I think is what he means here, instantly if Genesis goes. So basically 575 million also due in May. So you got more that's going to stack onto that 1.1. So this is a hairy situation, and it does not look good for Genesis. I think the biggest issue here is the effect that this has on Bitcoin in a short period of time. And I'd love to get you guys' comments on where you think this might be going. We're going to continue to do more and more deep dive research on this, how this plays into the crypto markets, but more importantly is all of the effect, because this could also have a contagion effect on a variety of different areas. We're going to be dropping a video also on Metropolitan Bank. Here's another big issue that's facing the industry. Remember, Metropolitan Bank is the onboarding bank for things like Crypto.com and many others. They are exiting the crypto market. So that in itself is another scenario. All right, we're going to wrap up here. If you guys are not part of the Diamond Circle, get in. It's one of the ways to keep track of all this stuff that's going on a high-speed basis. You get an email a couple times a week, keeps you up to date on all the stuff that drops here. And of course, if you are not following me on Twitter, make sure and do that. I try to drop as much as I can out there, but it's at Paul Barron, simple. Make sure and visit our website too. It's just paulbarronnetwork.com. We have a lot of stuff going on over there. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.